So I'm Justine Riley, I'm the Director of Sporting Heritage, and I'll be chairing today's session. This webinar is supported generously by the Heritage Fund and the players of the National Lottery, and it's also part of our 2024 National Sporting Heritage Day programme. And if you're not aware, National Sporting Heritage Day takes place on the 30th of September every year, and it's an opportunity to celebrate and share the nation's sporting heritage. So today we'll be discussing and understanding the importance of sporting heritage to sport, thinking about the opportunities that the role heritage has to play in sport, consider the barriers which prevent sport from harnessing its heritage, and discussing what we could do to remove those barriers. Now, before I introduce you to today's panel, I just wanted to give you a few housekeeping pointers. So we are recording the session, as you'll have seen. So if you prefer to keep your camera off, that's absolutely fine. Please go ahead. And we'll be uploading the recording to our YouTube channel so that you can easily access it after the session today. You can use the chat function at any time to share any comments or observations, or if you have any questions. And we're hoping to have time at the end to take as many of those questions back to the panel that we can. Please also, if you could keep the audio off today, that would be brilliant. We have got closed captions enabled, so you can access them through the menu button on your Zoom panel. And in a moment, I'll drop some links into the chat which share details of further support and advice and guidance that you can get access to, and upcoming events for funding support that we can provide you with. So lots of information there. I'm going to move on to our panel introductions. Now, one of our panel members is having incredibly difficult tech issues, so will join us hopefully as we move forward. We've got Ricky Boardman, Head of Research and Development at the Sport and Rec Alliance. Chris Earle, who's having problems, who's the Director of Special Projects at Paddle UK, and Tom Sharp, Commercial Manager from the Welsh Sports Association. So before we're going to get into the questions, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to give a brief introduction to themselves and their work so that you have the context of where they fit before this starts. So I'm going to ask you, Ricky, to start.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Justine. So, hi, everybody. My name's Ricky Boardman. I'm, as Justine mentioned, Head of Research and Development at the Sport and Recreation Alliance. Some of you may or may not have come across the Sport and Rec Alliance before. We're actually celebrating our 90th anniversary next year. We were initially founded as the Central Council for Physical Recreation, and a kind of the original Sport England, as it were. Now our job is to be the independent voice of the sector. So that is effectively representing the 300 plus members that we have, their interests and voice into Westminster, and specifically because sport and physical activity is a devolved issue, covering the area of England in this regard. Our membership ranges from the Football Association and English Cricket Boards, England and Wales Cricket Board, I should say, Tom on the line, and then also right down to the Wheel of Yoga, various different sort of independent dance forms, metal detecting, pigeon racing, you name it, we represent it. As long as it's some form of sport and physical activity, then it's our bag. As I mentioned, we're celebrating our Emerald anniversary next year, which is very exciting, and we've been sort of delving into our own archive. So hence, I think the conversations we've been having with Justine and Sporting Heritage, and really pleased to be here, Justine. So thank you for having us.
Oh, thanks so much, Ricky. I must get that metal detector out.
It's got there's a rich heritage of metal detecting in England, as our members tell us. Yeah.
Thanks so much. I'm going to move on to Tom.
Yes, thank you. And yes, good morning, everyone. And we are effectively the cousins of the SRA. So we are the Welsh Sports Association. And as Justine mentioned, I'm Tom Sharp. I'm the commercial manager, but that covers a number of sins, really. I think my main responsibilities are supporting the vast membership based. We have 140 member organisations, of which the vast majority are the national governing bodies of sport in Wales, but we also have a number of leisure trusts, educational institutions, professional clubs, emerging sports, as Ricky alluded to there. And yeah, we do very much the same thing as the SRA. We advocate on behalf of our membership base, the collective voice of the sector, and we push their agenda to Welsh Government and Sport Wales when necessary. And then we provide a whole host of shared business solutions and services as well. I've known Justine now for a number of years, worked on the national framework for sporting heritage of Wales with her. So that's my role and remit with regards to this. And yeah, happy to answer any queries and questions you've got. And I'm just more interested in listening and hearing what you all have to say as well. So that's me.
Oh, thanks so much, Tom. Yeah, brilliant. It's great to have you both here today. And it's also great that Chris has been able to join us. I'm going to make you leap into the unknown, Chris, and introduce yourself. And I'm going to hope that the notes that I sent before mean you know where we're at. So we're just at that stage where if you could just introduce, who you are, and it's a bit like blind date, isn't it? And where you come from.
Can you hear me okay?
We can. Hi, Chris.
Fantastic. Apologies, technical issues. I'm Chris Earle. I'm a Director of Special Projects for Paddle UK, previously known as British Canoeing. We are kind of traditional national governing body. We have around about 400 affiliated clubs, around about 600 to 650 commercial delivery partners, and around about 80,000 individual members, people who join us so that they can get access to our waterways. We've changed our name to Paddle UK, partly because we've only around about 7% of our paddlers actually canoe. The rest of our members kayak, and obviously more recently, the growth of stand-up paddleboarding, and we've just become recognised as the national governing body for stand-up paddleboarding. So we're a traditional national governing body. I don't know what was the original question that you asked, Justine. Have you talked about?
No, you're all right. We're just in the introductions for context of where you're from and where that fits in terms of your work. So
Okay.
We're not on the questions yet. You can get away with just stopping there if you want.
I'll stop there then.
Thanks so much, Chris. I do have a kayak, so it's all good. I think you can see at the panel we've tried to pull together people who've got that real insight working in sport, and so I've really valued talking to each of you about, well, where does heritage fit and how can we as sporting heritage support sport itself to think about the importance of us and their past in terms of their work. And this panel session today is to really sort of get to grips with that a little bit more. So the first question I wanted to ask the panel members is that term heritage, because we know it can be quite off-putting, it can be quite exclusionary if you're not in the formal heritage sector. And there are other terms that we'll often use, things like memorabilia, to properly kind of bring alive what we're talking about and to make it relevant to people who aren't necessarily from the heritage sector. So to put this webinar in a context, and especially for those people who aren't maybe from a heritage sector, I wanted to ask the panel what the term heritage means to each of them, which is quite a difficult question to start with. I'm going to do it anyway. So who wants to go first?
I'm happy to have a crack.
Go for it, Chris.
I think it feels pretty much like, to me, like I individually feel about my family tree. And looking at preserving all the kind of the collective history of all the stories of the hundreds and thousands of people who've paddled, whether it be an individual achievement or a challenge that they've done, and the collection of all those stories and all that memorabilia, which actually is a problem for us because there's so much of it. But bringing those stories into one place and sharing them in one place is really, really important, because we can learn so much from those stories and those experiences that people had in the past. It helps us stop repeating mistakes we've made before, but also understanding that people have been there before us and done things before. So I might be a paddler that wants to do my first ever descent of a particular river. It's quite difficult to find information about who's done that before unless there is somewhere to go to. And that's what we're trying to get to. We're trying to find a place where we can collectively keep information, stories, anecdotes, anything that people can look at and refer back to when they themselves are doing it for the first time themselves. And that might be slightly different for other governing bodies, but for us, that's really, 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 really important.
Thanks, Chris. You touched on so many things there that, yeah, I'd like to hope that that's what, where heritage fits. Does anyone, Ricky, Tom, do you want to come back?
Yeah, happy to come in. So thanks for that, Chris. I think that does speak to as well what I sort of slightly prepared for this. I think what I'd written down is that heritage is the recognition, celebration, and preservation of our inheritance. And I think that in the sporting and physical activity context, kind of inheritance is all really, because if you look at the sports that we play or the games that we play, where we do them and how we do them, is kind of pretty much a vestige really of kind of a Victorian or even an Edwardian society, depending on where one wants to draw the lines. And you can go back even further than that into history. Henry V launched his campaign in France to take on the second part of the 100 Years' War because allegedly he was sent a tennis ball as an insult. Our sporting heritage goes a heck of a long way back. And you think about the major events that happen that draw the kind of most eyes, certainly domestically, and have major cultural footprints. That London season that flows from Wimbledon to Lord's to Twickenham to Henley to Cowes to Cheltenham and Ascot. All of these things. These are inheritances from the best part of 150 years ago. Certainly, most of them starting their recollection with an 18. So if you think about the activities that we do and why we do them, why we spend our recreational leisure time in the way that we do, that is an expression in of itself of inheritance, and therefore the heritage that we have on this island. The other thing I sort of written down as well, I feel that there are probably like hard and soft inheritances. So there are things like the stadiums and the cups and the medals and the calendar that I would say are kind of part of the hard heritage, physical, for the most part, physical things that are handed down. But then there's also the attitudes and the emphases that those celebrations of the physical form and of physical attributes emphasize. And that has not necessarily always a positive context. And therefore, recognizing the inheritance or the heritage that we have from that inheritance is critical in making sure that our society can move forward and be the best that it can be and facing up to current challenges in the 21st century. So that was kind of a little bit of my reflection. Hopefully not all of that was verbal foliage. That's where I got to.
No, that's brilliant. And it's really interesting hearing you talk about the heritage and using different terms. That heritage has really specific terms to talk about what you're outlining and defining. And it's really good for us to understand that those terms don't always translate across, and that we need to make sure we're really, really clearly saying what we're talking about when we say heritage. Tom?
Yeah, I think on that very point, I think heritage is can be a term that isn't really used a great deal in sport. So I think, memorabilia or memories and the history of sport is probably utilised more so. So that was kind of always a challenge and a discussion that kind of we had, isn't it? And it kind of goes back to kind of Ricky's point about the tangible and the intangible kind of heritage that we experience. I think heritage to kind of me is the history of sport simply, and remembering all those that kind of came before, the rule makers, the players, those that have helped shape kind of sport and physical activity, and the various formats of those sports. the athletes, and obviously in my case certainly the family allegiances as well, and play a big part, and the trophies and the caps, of course. And then yeah, the songs that we all sing, and the smells of things like deep heat, you know, are a big thing for me. And just thinking, you know, I was born in England. I now live and work in Wales in Welsh sports, and just have a big memory of my grandfather singing Roath Park United, United we are, the forwards are hot on the ball. The fullbacks and halfbacks you seldom can beat, but the goalie you can't beat at all. And I love that because now I know where Roath Park is. I know who he played for, the songs they sang, and yeah, it takes me back to just my time with my grandfather, but also I know, kind of now know the heritage of that sport in a many ways. I know sport quite well, but I didn't really know about fullbacks and halfbacks at all. So it's just, yeah, that's what it means to me, heritage. And yeah, it's just vitally important that we maintain those stories, those smells, those songs, and make use of those to embrace those sports moving forward, and yeah, engage people with those sport and physical activity moving forward.
Thank you. I mean, I think you've all touched there on the fact that the heritage is important at all different levels, and the impact that it has on communities and individuals and at elite level. And, you know, there's all those different things, as well as that it's not just about things, it's about feelings and thoughts, and that's a lot. That's a lot to be thinking about, how we articulate that's what we're meaning. And given that, kind of onto my next question. So why do you think that sporting heritage is important to sports clubs, governing bodies, individuals, and what are the benefits to sport in terms of harnessing that heritage? Chris, you've unmuted first, you can go.
I'll be honest, I'm not sure that many sports actually think that it's important. And certainly it's been a bit of a fight, not a fight, it's been quite a discussion point within our governing bodies with all the other priorities that we've got, everything else that's going on, just how important is the heritage work. And it's almost I think I'm there now, but it's been quite an uphill struggle to get the organisation itself to recognise the importance of almost FOMO. I have a real fear of missing out on something. We have literally got people dying who have done some absolutely remarkable things within paddling, and we're losing their voice, we're losing their memories, we're losing their voices. And so partly there's a time imperative here, and for the governing body itself to recognise that there are some things that people have done, some human achievements that, like I say, are extraordinary, that we need to record in some way, shape, or form for posterity and for learning again from going from the future. We have books, we've got magazines, we've got paperwork, we've got film, we've got all sorts of bits and pieces that we're losing. And some of it is important, and sometimes it's not that important. We've unearthed, from after going out to all our members, there must be literally miles of 16 millimeter, 8 millimeter film, or whatever the millimeters they are. We've unearthed, miles of the stuff which is degrading every day, and we're going to lose that. So unless we do something about it, it could actually be an important record of an achievement somewhere, and we're going to lose it. And I think one day, if we don't do something about that, I think we will really, really regret it. So I think for many sports, it's not been that important, but I think my personal view is it should be. And I think we should do all we can to try and preserve that kind of heritage of the sport.
Thanks, Chris. Ricky, Tom?
I think just to build on that, I think that touches on Chris said that touches on a really important point, which I think is actually at the heart of all of this. When it comes to sports clubs around, I think it gives context to what is happening in the place in which sport is delivered, or sport physical activity is delivered at the point in time. And I think also the word I've sort of written down and underlined is stewardship, because I think it helps one to understand that, whatever the small p political machinations that are going on within any sports clubs, and I'm sure we're all sort of relatively familiar with the kind of fairly tiny in the context of things, but what feel quite big sort of power struggles and things like that within places like cricket clubs, tennis clubs, football clubs, whatever. That actually, by understanding the heritage that one is a part of, that there's actually a bigger priority and a bigger agenda outside of just those sort of small things of what's happening with the first team this week, or who's coaching the seconds next week, that kind of thing. It can help give broader context to, and just to sort of elaborate on that, I'm quite lucky in the sense that I play cricket at Kew Cricket Club, and that has, the first recorded match played on Kew Green was in 1723. We have CB Fry, who's an ancestor of Stephen Fry, a very celebrated cricketer and athlete. He was once offered the throne of Albania slightly randomly, but that guy's an first team captain of Kew, and we compete for the Fry Trophy every year. And then I play tennis at Ealing Tennis Club. We've got 3 Wimbledon winners, from the 1800s and early 1900s. We've actually just had a junior win the US Open, Mika. So if you follow that story, follow tennis at all. So, the kind of the heritage of that and the inheritance that comes through is kind of really powerfully preserved in some of those institutions. I think it's quite interesting in the context that Chris just raised around, paddling different routes and pioneers. Again, I think there's kind of a fellowship that transcends time, in a sense. Like by being aware of those that have gone before us, you understand sort of the shared sense of adventure in sports like Chris's, and seeking to push boundaries a little bit. I think that's also very important in those kinds of activities too. So I think I'm perhaps quite slightly lucky in the sense that the places in which I play, and it isn't just West London. I grew up in the West Midlands, and Enfield Cricket Club in Staffordshire was the original design for Lords was based on Enfield Cricket Club. So even in sort of out in the sticks of the West Midlands, you've got a real piece of physical sporting heritage that has gone on to inspire sports stadia around the world. So that's quite a cool thing. It's kind of everywhere in this country, really blessed with it. I might be predisposed for learning about it, and others people sort of glaze over when I talk, but hopefully not on this call. But yeah, that's so we're very lucky, I think, in this country as well. And I think it is something that's taken seriously, partly because of our predisposition to our history. So potentially we're in a better place than others might be, especially given how rich it is.
Thanks, Ricky. Tom?
Yeah, it's I think just simply remembering those that have come before the players, as Chris mentioned, the results and the films. It kind of helps shape the sport, and certainly if you know somebody's done a quicker time, perhaps when it comes to kayaking, builds kind of rivalries and things that you want to kind of aspire to be and achieve. And I think all of those things kind of build kind of a wider kind of affinity to a club, or maybe even kind of a region, certainly in Wales. And I think a club, kind of an affiliation to a club and a region can have numerous benefits. I think if we're looking crudely at a membership organisation, you simply can increase the membership numbers and the turnover of your organisation, so direct funds. But I think the bigger impact you can see is the affinity to the club through kind of volunteering and commitment to kind of committees and level of support from the community in terms of fundraising efforts and all that sort of stuff. So to keep the community, keep that kind of heritage and the community kind of going. So I see actually some kind of real niche benefits to clubs, but also societal benefits and and kind of social cohesion and wider health and well-being, which is really, really important. And then, yeah, even things like tourism. I wrote down there's a club in Wales. It's the only original active wall ball court in the whole of the UK, and it's just around the road. And it's there's a bit of news on it, and there's I encourage everyone to look it up. But it's that sort of thing would encourage people to that particular area if you're in the region. So I think that's vitally important too.
Justine, I think
Thanks, Tom. Chris,
when I said earlier about it not being important to national governing bodies, what I found on the journey that I've been on with paddling is that our volunteers do find it important. And so what I've discovered, and you guys at Sporting Heritage have helped us with it, is identify clusters of volunteers who have got together to keep and to bring together memorabilia and boats and documents and magazines and films and all of those things. So it clearly is important to our members, not maybe all of them, but there's a significant number of members for whom the preservation of information or data or memories about our sport is really, really, really important. And I think it's probably something we'll come on to later, is how do we harness that? How do we provide a system which makes it easier for them to do what they're doing? They are unbelievably passionate about the kind of niche area that they found interesting. And what I found is there are people, 2 or 3, 4, 5 different groups around the country who all think they're doing one particular piece of preservation. They don't know about other people. So part of our work is connecting those together and bringing them together and coordinating. But I think that's something you probably want to cover later on in the discussion. So I don't want to preempt that. Apologies.
No, that's all really useful and so pertinent stuff. And all of the things you're kind of touching on there's like academic research about it that talks about, taking that link there, Tom's, around tourism. So there are links around, the importance of this, but what our role is to try and ensure that is practically delivered on the ground and understood, because it's brilliant having like stats that say, oh, we know that this is really important, but that means nothing if sports clubs and governing bodies are so busy doing what they're doing and they can't see the link and it's too difficult. So it's good to know that, it's of relevance to all of you, and that is something we should be pushing forward. I'm gonna. Oh, go on, Ricky.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it also, in some ways, I think this can have a double-edged sword, in the sense that it can have positive and negative connotations to it. But in some ways, it helps tie people to a sense of place and build a sense of place that might not otherwise have been possible and feasible. And again, in a society such as ours, which is sort of increasingly diverse, people, having either their grandparents or their parents born overseas, for example, and maybe not feeling as associated with the place in which they live. The emphasis on heritage and the fact that these institutions are there to serve the communities that live around them is actually something that's quite powerful and profound, and has the potential to be a source of very positive levels of community integration. There are negative associations to that as well, in the sense of people feeling that things aren't for them. So probably a classic example would be the Lord's Pavilion not letting women in, for example, over a long period of time. But again, like being aware of that inheritance and the fact that it doesn't fit actually with our modern society is also a good vehicle for change, and a quite conspicuous change as well. Not saying that there aren't sort of further barriers and battles to be done around that, but kind of because of the conversation, conspicuous change can happen, and that then manifests itself in other areas of life.
Yeah, thanks, Ricky. I mean, absolutely crucial points, and it kind of comes on to the next thing that I wanted to ask you about. We've kind of touched a little bit on that it isn't always obvious to sports clubs, governing bodies, people working in sport, that heritage is something they should be considering and thinking. So I kind of wanted to join these next two bits together and talk about, so why is that? What are those barriers that prevent sport itself thinking about, why are we not doing heritage work? Why are we not considering our own past? Or is it happening? But as Chris is saying, it's happening in pockets. So it was to kind of, pick your brains on that. And there'll be some obvious answers of why it isn't, at the forefront, but all of those are so valid as well. So I don't know who wants to go first.
Yeah, I'm happy to kind of pick up. I think Chris alluded to it. There's so much being asked of national governing bodies, and funding is not looking great across the board. It's going down year on year. So I think when you ask the CEOs of the national governing bodies, they're fully focused on core governance, safeguarding, first aid, risk. Those are the kind of the key kind of pillars that they're working towards. And I think and that's the national governing bodies. I think they're the ones that do have a bit of time and resource to put to this. I think the rest of our membership, the sector is propped up by volunteers, and to ask them to do these things in addition to the core is quite a task. I think when you look at, there are some awesome examples. So Glamorgan Cricket, I'm literally looking at the stadium here now. They do a fantastic job of engaging. Their museum is wonderful. They're engaging their audiences through kind of QR codes at match days and all that sort of stuff. So that's kind of terrific. I just think there are also a whole host of clubs out there that have loads of memorabilia and shirts that they more often than not just auction off for fundraising activities and things like that. So I think there is just such a huge variance of what people can and can't do, and a lot of that is simply dependent on time, resource, and the funding that's available. So if we can help them with that, then I think that would be a good thing.
Yeah, it's the two C's: capacity and capability. In terms of capacity, we don't have the time, we don't have the money to put into this, because there are things which governing bodies think are probably more of a priority. Capability, there's again, I'm on this journey that I've been on with this work with you, Justine. There is more to this than just getting a load of canoes in a garage or collecting stuff. There's the skills in curating and going through the process of identifying what is important and what isn't important, and the logistics around that whole process is way bigger than I ever imagined. So in practical terms, we don't necessarily have the time to do this. Volunteers do have the time, do show that they've got the time, but there's only so far that can go, and we've got to make sure they feel supported, that they feel that we value what they're doing. So bringing some time and resource to help in that process and putting systems in place which makes it easier for them is really, really important. So all the things that Thomas, time, expertise, money, are the things that are probably the things that are holding us back, but that we need to make this work.
Yeah, I'm not
easy
going
solutions.
Go
on, Ricky.
I can't put any sort of new information. I absolutely agree with what the guys have said. What I can do, I suppose, is the research guys maybe put some numbers behind this. So in England, at least, we've had about £15 billion taken out of the sector over the last 14 years, since 2009, in real terms, adjusted figures there. So that's about 1.1 billion a year, which speaks to a lack of capacity at where that investment goes to at national governing body level. Community clubs, we've lost 1 million volunteers since COVID. Those volunteers who are still practicing we did a survey of sports clubs after COVID, and they reported that their level of admin work had gone up by about 25% in terms of the amount of time they had to do it, and the amount of delivery that corresponded to was a 3% increase. So effectively, we're asking people to row harder and harder, doing less and less stuff that's pertinent to actual delivery, in a context where we've got diminishing resources across the board. So I'm not sure if there's any sort of academic literature that links this, but I would suspect volunteering is very closely linked to morale and the feeling of impact, and having actually doing something that makes a difference and giving time towards that. And at the moment, the current kind of landscape and environment, we have to be aware, is kind of antithetical to that, and therefore is very challenging. And we're very proud of the people that remain as volunteers. So no new perspective, I suppose, from what Tom and Chris have talked to there, but perhaps some numbers just to back up just how challenging the piece it is. And so it's no wonder that people aren't necessarily, when they're trying to get canoes out on the water in the first place, or trying to get teams on the pitch, it's no wonder that they're not diving into archives and having a look at an old film, because they've got enough to do just to do all the safeguarding, the environmental checks, everything that they have to do. It's amazing that it happens at all, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, staggering, some of those figures, aren't they? And it's, the fact that this is the narrative that we hear again and again, how difficult it is, and those barriers that are there, at the same time as recognizing, crikey, this stuff is at risk and it's going to be lost. So given the context of all of those difficulties, but the recognition that this is absolutely crucial, do you think that there are any, you've touched on them a little bit there, Chris, and all of you, in various different things we've spoken about, but what can we do to shift this? Are there things that we can do to remove the barriers, whether they be short or long term kind of things that need to be considered? Because that's always where we're thinking in terms of sporting heritage. What can we do to shift those barriers? Because it's very easy to kind of go, well, we just can't do anything. But actually, if we can stage and stagger various different things that can support either us as an organisation, or just that understanding of what would make a difference to a sports club or to a governing body, thinking, do you know what, actually, maybe we could tackle this.
It's a really interesting question, and I'm kind of looking at it from a kind of the umbrella or helicopter viewpoint. I mean, you're doing some amazing work with us and have helped us kind of set out a process through which we can start to both bring people together. So the idea of an advisory group, a volunteer advisory group, to help us. The next bit is a decision-making matrix about how do we make decisions about what is good, what is memorabilia, what is important, what's not important. We're now talking to a number of universities about being a repository for our books, our films, setting up a website. We've got a website set up by our volunteers, which we're basically now going to help support. Why can't that be done centrally? So why does this have to be done individually with each sport? Why can't your organisation set up a partnership with a university or a small number of universities that says this is the place where your important books go, or the place where you digitize your film, or where you digitize your magazines or important board papers and things. So it's all in one place, and we're not having to repeat it, and we're not all having to go and do the same negotiations that I'm having to do with Loughborough and UCLan and all sorts of other different places. I just think providing a system and a place where this could all be put into, where each governing body, it would make it way easier. It would cut costs, and it's probably a fantastic bid to the Lottery Heritage Fund for doing that, rather than us all going in our separate ways and doing it separately. So there are all sorts of benefits around cost saving there, but also shared learning and shared time and shared experience.
I'd say
we absolutely agree, Chris.
I'd say that's the 100% where I would be. There's, you mentioned capacity and capability. I think, you know, a lot of the sports clubs that certainly I'm involved in and that I'm aware of have volunteers who are very passionate and familiar with this. And they probably do actually have the time, if they've moved away from coaching and, you know, given up with the admin, to do it as well. And they also have the capability, but they don't realise they do, because I hadn't appreciated until I started this journey and looking ahead for next year's our 90th year celebration. Actually, just how feasible so much of this preservation is. You know, speaking to different institutions and their archives, the fact that a lot of it is free. Who knew that? You know, I assumed we'd be paying thousands of pounds a year to store some of this stuff, but apparently not. Like, you know, and there's different conversations around getting a lot of this through the door. But you know, it's not just because it's free financially doesn't mean it's free of any obligations. But that, you know, gives us it makes it a hell of a lot more feasible. And actually, I think there are a lot of sports clubs, especially community sports clubs, who just simply wouldn't realise how, you know, with a couple of passionate volunteers, how easy the skills are to acquire. And, you know, well, the skills and knowledge are to acquire and what's possible for them. And I think if more more understood, you know, how within reach doing some of this stuff is, more would undertake it. But sadly, there isn't sort of that, I guess, disseminator of knowledge and widespread awareness of the opportunity that's there for sports clubs.
Thanks, Ricky. Yeah, I mean, so there's some brilliant stuff that you're talking about there that we've got project work on at the moment around storage and economies of scale, and how do we do that so we're not each time going, oh, so you've got a collection that's this geographical base, or you've got a collection that talks about this kind of sport, where might that go, so that it's quite straightforward for that to happen. But definitely the amount of times we've sat there and thought, do you know what, you know, a National Sports Museum or a National Sports Depository or something that looks like that could support all clubs, and how does that work, is always something that we are thinking about and considering. And I think it could massively support. And then, yeah, our own capacity and growing that and ensuring that can help. And then also, how do we share better, you know, you're saying, Ricky, the support that we could give people working in sport and champions who already kind of come and access some of our stuff, but we know we're not getting anywhere near where we need to be. How do we do that better? And that's stuff that I think we need to be considering as an organisation, and constantly are, and how we can work more closely with sport to help that dissemination of information. Is something that is, crucial. Tom, before I go on to the next thing, do you want to add?
Yeah, not a great deal to add. I think just that centralised directory of heritage and opportunities for us all to collaborate on that approach, and for it to be automated and managed in one way or another. I'm a big one for, you know, digital tech, and I think that centralised hub for heritage would be absolutely amazing. You just want to be able to have the correct scope, so that people, regardless of their device, are able to kind of upload and deposit. And then, to kind of Chris's point, I think if we have that directory, there needs to be those APIs or connections to then the specific website, so that we can showcase the stories and those assets to those you know, seeking that particular sport or seeking that particular activity. But yeah, nothing much to add really, other than I totally agree with the centralized solution for us all. And if we can find some funding from somewhere, that would be incredible. I have to just flag,
I think you've all just written our next national lottery bid. It's like, it's brilliant.
Well, there, in fairness, there is an anti-racist Wales Culture, Heritage and Sport Fund, 24 to 25, that is just been published on the 4th of September, which I'll circulate, because that is an opportunity for individuals to, at least, or clubs to start collating their data and as Chris alluded to, making a start on such a big task. So there's there's applications between 3 and 15 grand for that fund.
Oh, brilliant.
So I'll circulate that. That's been announced this month.
Thank you. No, that's brilliant. And Chris, did you want to come back?
It just goes back to Thomas's point. There's so much now that we can do online that we could never do in the past. Even some of the physical stuff. So we've got canoes and kayaks and all sorts of equipment that are in people's garages or in warehouses or in storage places, which are really significant to us. So some of the kayaks that we used on the D-Day landings to go in before the D-Day landings and came back, both the storage that the people who were in those boats is really critical to us, but also the boat. Now, that boat's, we got to find ways to keep it, stop it from deteriorating and just, being attacked by woodworm and all that kind of stuff. But we can 3D scan it now. So we can at least keep a record of that. So finding ways for the different cricket bats or different rugby balls or all sorts of different sporting equipment. Yes, it's physically difficult to put them all in one place, to keep them all for obvious cost around storage, but these can at least be kept, images of those things, and it can be used for the future for research and for other purposes. So the solution is online, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. With that kind of like, where do we keep things that we absolutely want to have stored, but making sure that it's accessible and cheap, to be quite honest. Thank you. I'm just looking in the chat. Yes, so we are actually the national body to advise and support. So it's great that that's been useful. Oh, is that you, Stuart? Hi, Stuart. That's great that it's been useful and that we can be there to do that. We are tiny, so we are the equivalent of about 3 full-time posts, maybe not even quite that. But we can punch a lot bigger than we are, and we'll always do that. And the more we can listen to the work or the things that you need, and particularly we're thinking, how can we really, really support sport? We recognise that there is a huge need and gap, but also wish within sport to kind of get access to this and do more of this work. So yeah, all good. We have a little bit of time for any questions that anybody in the room wants to ask. You are welcome to put your hand up virtually if you know how to do that, or I will scan across the screen. Or drop anything into the chat. Not any hand. Oh, no questions. Aha, there is a question. Hi, Stuart.
Hi. As you saw in my comment in the chat, I'm involved in Birmingham with 2 sporting institutions, Aston Villa and Berkshire Harriers, 2 different ends of the spectrum in terms of money. Villa got loads of money, now they're in the Champions League and so on. They are in some ways destroying some of the heritage. That Villa Park is got an old stadium, there's a lot of pictures on the walls and what have you. It's now been replaced by commercial stuff, and we're fighting. I now actually work for Aston Villa as a stadium tour guide, and we are fighting against the businessmen who want to just make it a commercial place and whatever. So it's a bit of a fight in that sort of level, trying to make them aware of what the heritage is and how it's important to the club. I think we are winning in some ways on that. It's just been moved to a different place. So
I was going to ask you, what arguments are you making to give that, to push for heritage?
Well, really, the arguments are the club is not just this year in the Champions League. It's 150 years of winning trophies in the 1870s and 80s. Yeah, that's why this particular club, Aston Villa, is famous throughout the world. We gave the world the Football League in 1888, William McGregor. So my first role with Aston Villa was with a supporters group, and we raised money to buy the statue outside of William McGregor, who started the Football League. So it's important that the management know what's going on. I think they do. I mean, we are working with people who are trying to make loads of money to keep us in the Champions League, obviously, to be a successful football club, but they do appreciate these things as well. So we are working with them to try and emphasise the why heritage is important. At the moment, we can't go in to do our tours because they're still doing building work. It's overrun from the summer. So at the weekend, we did a heritage walk. We went walking around from Aston Villa Park to visit the places where the first game was played, where they met to arrange the first club, the first matches where it started. So we actually did it. We took the heritage out into the community and walked around some of the poorest parts of Birmingham in the rain at times. We actually got that working. We got the community involved, and actually put the club into context. 150 years is the anniversary in a few weeks' time. What was the club doing at that time? Why it started?
Yeah, context and that community involvement is everything, isn't it? Thank you. Any of the panel want to come back? Any comment? Don't have to.
I know it sounds a bit the decision-making matrix thing that we talked about is really important, and constructing something that shows that you've made a logical decisions about why something is important and why it's not important, Stuart, is really useful when you're arguing with people about why something should be kept. It shows that you're giving some thought to it. It shows that there's a justification for it. It shows there's a reason and rationale for why you think something may be kept. And what that process does, it helps show whoever you're trying to persuade that something's important, that it's critical. So, for example, we've got a particular canoe. Let's just take one example. A particular canoe. If we say, has anybody else around the country got this particular type of canoe? We think it's unique, but has anybody else? We've actually done that call. Suddenly we find that there's 600 of the damn things around the country, all in someone's garage, and actually it's not unique. And that was part of the decision-making matrix. Says, is this really the only one? And have you done all you can to make sure it's the only one? So it may be a photograph, it may be a film, it may be something on the wall or something's there. But when you've got something that's uniquely singular and it needs preservation, that's a really strong argument to say that we need to keep this and we need to preserve it. Now, it may not be on the wall of Aston Villa Football Club, but it may be somewhere, it's kept somewhere that preserves the history of what it is you're trying to do. So putting together that kind of decision-making matrix is critical. It sounds a bit pompous and a bit posh and all that kind of stuff, but actually it really does help persuade whoever you need to persuade that you've thought about it, it's considered, and it's unique.
Well, thanks, Chris. I mean, that explains it brilliantly in terms of that context with the canoe. And within the heritage sector, there's something that's talked about in terms of significance all the time and how you analyse significance. And the Welsh Government actually delivered and developed a big framework. Watch this space for us looking at how we might develop that in terms of supporting sport, because we know that if we try and translate that framework as it stands, it's too big for the sports sector. There's too much involvement, but we also know it's crucial because, like you say, you've got these huge collections, and often quite a lot of those collections are quite big. How do you know what you're keeping? How do you know, even if you're looking at things that are, match day reports, how do you know that that is the only one or it's significant, and who is it significant to? So it's supporting, when people get that bit further down the line of being able to say, we need to make sure we're looking after this, how they do that quite easily and quickly. So thank you. It's now past. I know we started slightly late, but I'm also conscious that the time booking was till past. For my lovely panel, thank you so much for your time.